Hey everyone, I'm Sasha,
Hey, I'm Danny.
and today we are going to be spending the next 15 to 20 minutes really talking about something which we both really love, which is a SOC. So both Danny and I have experiences with SOC. I sell SOC services, and Danny is part of a SOC. So we're going to get two kind of different angles of this particular subject. So Danny, why don't you introduce yourself and tell a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. And I have known Sasha for about 10 years now. I think
Yep.
we went to university together, and since then have been good friends, keeping a close eye at each other's careers. And here we
Hmm.
are doing a first kind of podcast together. So looking forward to this. Uh, so we graduated in 2018. I ended up working as a cybersecurity engineer straight after university. Did that for about a year, and then moved into a SOC team, a managed service provider, working as a SOC analyst. So got plenty of experience there, working with different clients, different vendors, different technologies, and really understanding how a SOC functions within a business. And then ultimately moved to Oracle, which is my current employer. Um, and I manage a SOC team globally now. So our team's based in India, UK, and the US. So I think I'm in a good position in terms of talking about SOC teams and really giving
Absolutely.
that perspective, as Sasha said, from the other side of actually buying a SOC or building a SOC.
Absolutely. And so, for anyone who doesn't know me, I am Sasha. I am a security sales engineer for ConnectWise. And, for the past nearly 2 years, I've been kind of getting my hands really dirty with what a SOC really does and really sell the kind of unique sales points of a SOC and the real benefits of using a SOC as well, which is why I wanted to bring Danny into this conversation to really kind of give another angle of this, the real pros and cons with using a SOC, why a company would want to use a SOC, and really to kind of start this off is what is a SOC? That stands for Security Operations Center, but I've got Danny over here. So, Danny, tell me a little bit more about what is a SOC and why would an organization use a SOC?
Sure, great question. So SOC is ultimately a business function within, generally within security, and the goal of a SOC function is essentially to monitor, analyze, and respond to any types of security events and incidents that a company or organization may face. So, depending on that, I think different companies have different sizes of SOC teams. Some spend millions of dollars per year on the SOC functions, whereas some other smaller organizations maybe get like a smaller team, or look at having a managed service provider as well, to kind of if they don't have the capital to invest in the SOC function in house, they sometimes do look into third parties. So there's again pros and cons to having your own in-house function versus having an external company provide you with that services. And I think you're kind of in a good position based on your experience to maybe talk more about why, what customers look for when they kind of reach out to you as a sales engineer, and what are some of the, I guess, problems they're facing or challenges
Mhm.
that they're trying to resolve.
Well, it's exactly that. You mentioned that you get some organizations, especially enterprise level, that can afford to spend millions of pounds building up their own stock. And you got some organizations which are small to medium sized businesses, which are the ones I normally focus on, which, hey, maybe they might have one analyst, but that is it. They can't be able to afford to be able to spend that much resources and time to be able to build a stock. So what do? They focus on reaching out to an MSP to provide those services. And most of the times, those MSPs would use or partner up with an organization such as ConnectWise in order to be able to use those services and technologies. And so I do, many demonstrations, many conversations with business owners, C-level kind of owners as well. That I deal with CISOs, I deal with CEOs and CTOs, and the common thing that I get is that, hey, we just don't have the resources to be able to deal with this 24 hours, 7 days a week, and they say, yeah, sure, between business hours is absolutely fine, but we would rather be spending our time with other things, other important tasks. So it normally comes down to the two T's, T for tango. So one is, do you have the time to deal with all these kind of alerts and all the noise that's generated by, let's say, an EDR solution? If you do, then fine. And do you have the talent to deal with it? Can you be able to deal with the false positives? How do you know it's a false positive is another question. Doing the analysis, the investigation. And you see a lot of organizations that don't have both of those, or they may have one. And normally what it is they have the talent, they don't have the time. Okay, so which is why they would partner up or outsource this particular, element for a SOC team and be able to deal with that sort of noise 24 hours a day. So it doesn't matter if it's only business hours or during the night, that that there's a 24/7 team that's going to be monitoring if something does occur. They could be able to deal, respond, isolate that particular threat, and if need be, escalate it to the particular organization as well. So that's the normal thing I kind of have from a conversation perspective with prospects and partners.
Now, I think you've raised a couple of excellent points, right? You could have maybe um, organizations can be spending a lot of money on tooling and actually buying all the latest tech, but then do you have the right people and the right skill set to utilize that tech, right? Do you have maybe the right engineers to bring the right log sources to all of your, SIEM solutions, or onboard the right logs from the cloud, or containerized applications, that sort of stuff. So yes, I think there has to be a balance, and I think that, to your point, that's one of the major challenges right now that organizations face, right? Like,
Yeah.
where do we spend the money? Do we spend it on tech? Do we spend it on people? How do you balance it out? And yeah, I think that's an ongoing challenge for sure.
And you mentioned an acronym for, some people on the listeners on this call may not know a SIEM, so which stands for a Security Information and Event Management. That is a tool that I am very familiar with, which we use, and it's also kind of responsible by the SOC to be able to deal with those sorts of alerts and threats. So, Danny, why don't you tell us a little bit more as to the advantages of using a SIEM solution and the benefits, of course, of a SOC monitoring for that as well?
Sure. So, yes, traditionally, the way a SOC is structured is you would have the SIM kind of at a central point within the SOC function, and you'd have typically data sources going into a SIM. And that's how analysts would then create detection rules on top of those log sources and do the monitoring and investigations and ultimately respond to any types of malicious activity, right? So, yeah, typically that's the structure of a SOC. With the transition to cloud, there's lots of cloud native technologies and security solutions coming in the market. So I think organizations have to be smarter about how they use their SIM, because ultimately most SIM providers do charge based on the amount of logs you're ingesting,
That's
right? And that's a
correct. Yeah.
common way of charging. So organizations have to be smart about what logs they send to their SIEM solutions, and also the volume of logs they send to the SIEM solutions, right? So do you send everything to a SIEM is a typical question I think most organizations ask, and I'm pretty sure you and your team gets as well, is what log sources should we be ingesting into SIEM, right? And that's a challenge, because you got to understand the organization and what they actually do and the products they offer to ultimately understand what log sources are critical to the detections you're making. So yes, to your point and to your question, typically a SIM is a central kind of repository of most logs in a SOC function, and that's how analysts and everyone working in a SOC typically you know
Two
analyze and
things.
respond to
Yeah.
alerts.
Two things there, which was really important what you said. What logs to be able to ingest, because of course there's some vendors out there that will go ahead and charge you per ingestion log. So month 1, 2, and 3 may be normal, but month 4 you may have had an attack, maybe an incident. Those logs are 10 times more. So you have kind of an unstable bill. So on the 4th month, for example, the owner's like, hey, why is my bill so large? And of course, they see the amount of logs that have been ingested. You have other vendors out there that don't charge per log ingestion, but charge per user of active Microsoft license users, for example, which is incredibly more manageable, for example. So it really depends, and not many people, not many vendors out there that will charge per user. You'd normally see per log ingestion, Splunk, Fortinet, for example. They're the ones that would charge per log ingestion because they're designed for enterprise level. Whereas you got some, for example, like the ConnectWise SIEM solution, which is targeting MSPs, SMBs, which will allow you to be able to bill per user. So that's one thing which was definitely really valuable, what you've mentioned as well. The second thing is, the value of a SIEM solution, especially when it's kind of controlled, monitored, and dealt with a SOC team, is that when that threat, when that incident hits the endpoint, the EDR, in my opinion, from a sales engineering perspective, I would say that's already too late. Okay, shouldn't have made it that far. Okay, a worst case scenario, then it should have hit the endpoint. What about all those different things that it may have touched? User account, email, for example, perhaps, some sort of indicator of compromise, such as impossible travel, logging in outside of the EU region if you're based in the EU. All of these things can be detected, and all of these things could be technically an indicator of compromise. So that is the real kind of gap that we need to fill up. And how do you fill up that is by having a solution such as a SIEM, and especially managed by a SOC team as well, because of the amount of things that it can be able to ingest. It's going to generally create more alerts, which of course, if you don't have a SOC team, as I mentioned, time and talent, those are the two things which a lot of people will suffer with, especially with a SIEM solution. So those are the two real things I wanted to really point out. And you mentioned that, which is definitely 100% valuable with this conversation. And, when we talk about the value of a SOC team, have you seen any incidents where you've seen, for example, if the SOC wasn't there monitoring at that time, at that day, and if it was down to the end customer to deal with that, have you ever seen any incidents like that where you'd say, yep, this is why the SOC team is incredibly valuable?
I think, yeah, there have been a few instances there, and I think the primary reason why a SOC is really critical to any business function is so generally security is a cost center in any business, right? Security is not generating revenue for the business unless, yes, there are ways to demonstrate value and be part of like onboarding new customers and security questionnaires, that sort of stuff. So in terms of a SOC function, it kind of sits in the middle, and the function of a SOC is not just to respond to alerts and events. It is to really understand how the organization works and what their products are, as I said earlier. And because they sit at that critical point and have access to most log sources, the decisions they can make will have more context than specific teams within an organization.
100%.
So being that central kind of heart of the organization and seeing pretty much everything that goes on from endpoints, to your point, from emails that are going on to logs through the firewall, EDR, cloud stuff. So they are placed at the heart of an organization, and I think that
Very
puts
true.
them in a great spot to respond and really take charge when things go sideways. So typically you have incident responders that are available to kind of respond. You get hit by ransomware, they'll jump in, really know what systems to isolate, where to kind
That's
of break the
correct.
network connections,
Yeah.
and then think about business recovery as well, right? So yes, I think having a SOC function is really critical, especially nowadays when attackers are really getting advanced, AI and all
Yep.
that stuff. And generally, right, if you are a malicious actor, you don't have a 9 to 5, right? Of you can work anytime.
That's right.
You can have different motivations. You don't have to go through 10 layers of change control. If you're working for a large enterprise, before you make a change, you have to wait a week, right, for something to get approved. Whereas attackers are just there trying different things and staying ahead. So it's always a challenge for SOC teams to kind of stay on the pace of attackers, and that's the main thing, right? Which is why SOC teams
Absolutely
again
right.
are really, really critical in a business.
Absolutely right. And again, you've mentioned two important things right there. Number one was, staying ahead of the game, making sure that you are fully up to date with new sophisticated malware. That's why threat intelligence team is going to be important, right? That constant kind of education, not just with the SOC team, but also for their partners and customers. So something like that's going to be always important for anyone in the audience that's looking for a SOC service. Make sure that they do have some sort of threat intelligence team attached to that SOC. Ideally, not outsourced from that SOC team, but someone that's a team that's internal. Okay, because again, if it's outsourced, there is a gap which you want to try and minimize as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So ensuring that you have a threat intelligence team that's internal to that SOC. Another thing that you mentioned is that, hey, bad actors do not only work 9 to 5. Okay, they work at any time, and preferably they work when the organization is pretty much as quiet as possible, because there's less eyes on the network. So that's why things like cyber essentials, things like PCI DSS, all of these sort of compliance elements require you to be able to monitor, detect, and respond to endpoint-based threats, or any sort of threats really at that stage that the SOC's looking after. And that doesn't mean that, hey, it can only be 9 to 5. That's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to be able to monitor and detect and respond to those endpoint-based threats in order to maintain compliance, because of the valuable things that you may have. So PCI DSS, for example, which stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, you're looking after credit card information, debit card information. As soon as that data is leaked and out, there is a breach, and God almighty, that organization is going to have a hefty fine to deal with because of the breach of compliance, which is why a SOC team is going to be incredibly important. Probably one of the first things they're going to be looking at as well, about 24/7 monitoring, especially for someone like Danny and his team to be able to look after that sort of organization, is incredibly valuable, which is why SOC analysts get paid a hell of an amount, because of the amount of value that they bring for an organization. And
Yeah,
really
no,
the last thing.
completely. I think just to
Good.
add to your point, sorry,
Yeah.
uh, you kind of raised a really good point about um, SOC teams shouldn't just be onboarding tools and putting people and doing things and monitoring. I think there is an element to constantly actually validate if your detections are actually even working.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some good attack simulation tools out there that provide you with attack simulation and validation of your defensive controls, that they are actually kind of doing what they're supposed to be doing. So if you deploy a new firewall or a new EDR, there are ways you can validate if they respond to the top 5 attacks that you're kind of worried about and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
constant, I think, validation is equally important as much as deploying new use cases in a SOC function.
Yeah, very good point. And I think really, especially this goes back to the last recording I did with a colleague, Matt Topper. We talked about getting into cybersecurity. So, Danny, with your wealth of knowledge and experience that you've had in the industry, especially with the SOC realm, can you tell us a little bit more about, if you had someone to mentor, what's the kind of steps, best practices in order to be able to not only to get into the cybersecurity, but also get into a role like you were?
Sure, no, great question. I think in terms of having the right technical skills, there's plenty of stuff, material out there, all over LinkedIn. There's some good programs, good university degrees, lots of certifications out there. So I guess having the right technical knowledge is kind of the basics, right? But
Mm-hmm.
apart from that, I think the really critical thing that is really important to kind of get into the industry and also progress, your career, is networking. So networking with other individuals on LinkedIn within your organization. I think that's the biggest thing I recommend to anyone who joins a company for the first time. The
Mm-hmm.
first 3 to 6 months should be spent networking, understanding what different teams do, making connections across the org. Because ultimately, if you're a SOC analyst and you need to reach out to some other team about a potential incident or
Yeah.
event, having that, beforehand communication and networking and actually knowing the person just makes life easier. Otherwise, you reach out to someone and they're like, oh, it's the dreaded SOC guy again. What does he want now, right? So
That's it.
having that human interaction, creating connections, I think it just not only benefits you from your actual work perspective, but also from identifying new opportunities to grow, progress within your organization, but just being visible, right, and being seen
Mm-hmm.
on platforms like LinkedIn and being noticed. I think it's really important.
100%. And I'll also add on to that as well that both Danny and I have a huge kind of ambition with cybersecurity, and the fact that we want to continuously evolve in this realm, and such a rewarding realm as well. And exactly what Danny said is that continuously network. So both Danny and I are going to an exhibition in June called InfoSec in London. So we're both going to go ahead and look at all these different fantastic vendors, get to know those vendors, understand really or for me, for example, where the competition is as well. Every day is a learning capability as well. Even if it's just going ahead and shaking someone's hand and just getting to know them and understanding what they do as a role is not only going to be beneficial for you as an individual, but also it's going to help you with those soft skills. Okay, it's not always you're going to be behind a screen typing away. There's going to be a moment that you need to go ahead and do either a presentation or go ahead and talk to someone and deal with those sorts of elements. So it's important to be able to also gain not only the technical skills but the soft skills as well. Yeah, that's my input with that
100%
comment.
agreed. And dinner's on you, Sasha. Just saying.
100%, we'll get that done. Excellent. So Danny, this has been a fantastic and short 15 to 20 minutes, hopefully. And I just really wanted to just kind of extend my appreciation to you and your time with what you do in this in this industry, as well as the time that you spent with me today, and hopefully many more to come with many more videos and webinars that we do together.
Likewise, always happy to help, and definitely would love to join you again at some point.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully see you next time.
Cheers. Bye bye.